Hi, everybody. My name is Abdul Rahman Siksek. I'm part of the Prisma Cloud team at Palo Alto Networks. You know what Prisma Cloud is, if you want to think of it in really broad terms, is a cloud security platform, but really the focus is around cloud native. And we'll talk about what that means in a couple of minutes. The focus of the presentation today is going to be around maybe how different cloud environments are. I think Nikolai alluded to that in his presentation, but really to think about the security opportunity in cloud, which I think is often overmissed and it's all doom and gloom when we talk about cloud security. I think that there's a great opportunity for us to think about security in a different way. This is what I'm going to take you through over the next 20 minutes. Maybe a very good starting point is going to be to talk about and understand the challenges that customers are facing today in cloud environments, or maybe concerns that also organizations have that are thinking about moving into cloud environments. There's an interlock or a very tight link between cloud development and security. The impact that development has to cloud environments, or the impact that cloud had on development, depending on who you speak to, is one where I think the challenge starts, but at the same time where the opportunity is. That is closely linked to how security is done in cloud environments and how different it is. Not only are the attack vectors different, but the speed and the agility expected out of cloud environments would really be taken away if we are to go and implement manual legacy controls that we've had in our traditional data centers over the past couple of years. When I say cloud as well, I'm using cloud in a very loose term. What I mean by cloud is really the elastic use of compute, really thinking of how do we do compute rather than where do we do compute. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today not only impact public cloud, but are really relevant specifically in our region to private cloud, where we're finding a lot of those technologies that were pioneered and adopted in a public cloud world make its way to private cloud environments. We have a lot of strict regulations in certain parts of the region that pushes customers to go and do that, and we'll talk about how that is relevant as we progress. But maybe a good starting point is trying to understand the link between cloud and how applications are built. And the easiest example that I could give links to a discussion that Nikolai was having with you earlier around the financial flexibility. A couple of years ago, if you are to move into a cloud environment and if you adopt a very simple lift and shift approach of moving your applications as is into a cloud environment, you would soon realize that the promise that you had around financial flexibility is not there. On the contrary, a lot of customers realize that it's far more expensive. And what you end up in is a situation where you're running your data in somebody else's data center, and that's a cloud for you, but only at a more expensive ticket. And the reason that happens is those applications that were built for a legacy environment that had, to a certain extent, infinite capabilities around infrastructure is now chargeable in a cloud environment. So if you are to go and reap the benefits of these environments, I think a lot of organizations realize that applications will need to be re-architected. The other element that I think impacts that to a high degree is the requirement of ensuring that our customer experience is met. So the business requirements that are coming in that ultimately translate in a lot of examples to customers wanting a better service and companies being able to go and offer a better differentiator from a competitive standpoint really boils down to applications. And our capability of continuously updating our applications and providing the best customer experience is one, again, that really pushed a lot of organizations to go and modernize their applications. The numbers that we're looking at right here are global, but I think they're really directional in nature. What we're seeing here, I think, is very relevant to our region from a directional perspective. But I think over the past couple of months and the discussions that I've had with a lot of customers, I think COVID acted as stimulus to a lot of organizations. We've seen organizations accelerate their cloud plans, some moving into a cloud first strategy, But I've also seen a lot of customers move from a cloud first to a cloud only strategy because they decided they want to focus on their core business and kind of leave everything else to other providers, including cloud and IT. The medium that I think a lot of organizations start with is containers. I wouldn't say we have 1 out of 2 in our region that will use containers by the end of 2021, but I would positively think that we're going to have 1 out of 2 that are thinking of going and doing that. Whether you're starting with a very small app today or you're thinking of building a strategy around containers, I think that that would be the right time to start thinking of how do we do security over there. And if you are one that wants to kind of test the limits and push the boundaries, function as a service is an area where there is a lot of benefit in value from an outcome perspective that is yet to be probably recognized by a lot of customers. It's obviously not the end state. So as Nikolai mentioned, you're not going to push every single app that you have to containers and then hopefully go and abstract it even more in the form of serverless, but it's really picking the correct medium or correct form factor per use case or per applications that you have. Now, if we are to link that to actual development, one of the major changes that we've seen over the past couple of years is really the move from a predominantly waterfall approach in the majority of organizations to more of a sprint-based, cycle-based agile methodologies. The requirement is pushed by, again, the business asking us to act faster. IT is not quick enough. We want to be very quick to respond to market requirements. And that's where we're seeing organizations depart from large, chunky, monolithic applications to a microservices architecture. This brings a lot of value in terms of being able to achieve what Nikolai mentioned earlier in terms of scalability, but also that financial capability and optimization, where instead of going and having to scale a full application along with all the storage attached to it and every other path that you have linked to it, to being able to take a couple of microservices, scale up when required, and then scale them back down. But perhaps the biggest change from a security standpoint has been the way that we deploy those applications. In the past, we used to wait for a window that happens every couple of months for us to be able to update an application and hopefully not break it, to now moving into an environment where we have a continuous delivery model. You don't necessarily need to have a DevOps team for you to go and do that, but this is the way these microservices are being deployed. And then the question becomes, how do we deploy security when security predominantly was a gated check at a certain point in time? How do we respond back to the high level of automation, but also how do we respond back to the speed and expectations from both the business and our development community in being able to ensure that these environments that we run are secure? But I think one last note and something maybe to think about. In what we're seeing around in the region right now, I think we're looking at this model of building and delivering applications as maybe a specific example or a specific approach to a use case or an application that we have. But we're seeing more and more applications being built this way. It's not only the smarter approach, but I think it's one that delivers a lot of outcomes, not only from a business point of view, but also from a security standpoint that we'll talk about over the next couple of slides. The threat vector or the risk vector in the cloud is very different. And I think if you read through a lot of challenges and headlines that we've seen over the past couple of years, I think it's really easy to understand that. One of the areas that I want to focus on today is if you go back probably 5 or 6 years, cloud obviously is not new, cloud is about 10 years old. But if you go a couple of years back, if we wanted to go and provision compute or maybe provision storage, you would actually log into the cloud service provider portal and go and do that. But with the speed that I mentioned earlier, we had to go and match that speed of application deployment to the speed of the way that we go and provision infrastructure. And the way that we do that today is what we call infrastructure as code or templates. And what we've done over the past 18 months with the help of Unit 42, so Unit 42 is Palo Alto's security research team, and specifically the cloud team over there, have spent the past 18 months in analyzing 1 million templates that we have downloaded off GitHub. So these are publicly accessible. And what we've done over there is we've tried to understand what has been happening over the past 18 months to try and expect challenges into the future, if that makes sense. And what we found is in certain areas surprising, but in others maybe expected for a lot of the audience that we have today. And I'm only going to talk about two in the interest of time. The first one is insecure configurations. So very specifically in our study, we've looked at CloudFormation templates. So this is AWS specific at the moment. And we found almost half of them were insecure. And what we mean by that is we found one insecurity or more within these CloudFormation templates. Now, the way that goes is you would have a developer that wants to build a template. They would log into GitHub. They would find something that closely resembles what they want. They end up modifying that. But the challenge is they end up inheriting a lot of other challenges within the same code. And the problem that you have over there is in a traditional approach, when your approach is manual, that problem will be localized. But if you look at the automation capabilities with infrastructure as code, this is going to end up hitting you and propagating across your cloud environment. So that's one area to think of. The other, depending on where you operate. I know we have a lot of UAE businesses on the call, but we have businesses that also span across countries in the GCC and some that operate worldwide. And that's where compliance, I think, becomes really important. How do I ensure that I'm configuring my environment in a way that does not open me up to compliance risks or ends up headlining our business in a local newspaper? Again, almost half of the templates that we've analyzed had cloud native databases that were explicitly configured to not be encrypted. Just that's just one example of how different these environments are, and maybe just food for thought around how should we think about addressing the security challenges over there. Now, my next statement is probably one that is a bit controversial, but I think the majority of security teams do not really understand development practices. And I'm saying the majority because there are some that do. And the challenge that we've had historically is security was trying to keep up with a very fast and nimble development team. The opportunity that we have in a cloud world, specifically when we start to re-architect applications, when we start to use containers and beyond, and when we start to operate in this image-driven world, is we finally have an opportunity to bridge that gap and to be able to go and embed security and integrate security earlier into the development lifecycle. Bring security earlier to developers instead of focusing on runtime, which is where 80% of the businesses are today. The previous report that I mentioned as well, and we probably linked that as part of the presentation, also noted something else that I think is very interesting. 65% of the configuration issues that we found had to do with actual customer configs. So it was the result of a misconfiguration on the customer part. And if you want to map that to what happens in a cloud environment, specifically when we start to think about the level of automation that we have over there, the high level of abstraction, but the general speed that the environments run at, it's really important for us to be very smart about how do we address security. So what we think is the right approach is an approach that evenly distributes capabilities of security across those three phases. Being able to define as a security team what the end state should look like, and then giving your developers and operators the freedom and autonomy to be able to go and configure these environments and ensure that we do that in a way that's very automated and seamless. Because if you don't do so, what we're risking is potentially taking away a lot of the benefits that these cloud environments really promise by going and implementing manual or standard legacy controls. This obviously goes without saying, but I wanted to mention it for maybe a very specific point. Gartner thinks that the majority of customers are going to be running multiple cloud providers or hyperscalers. I think if we look at our organizations, although the cloud strategy or a cloud first strategy or maybe a cloud only strategy is a CIO or a CTO office discussion, but the selection of where do we actually end up hosting is very developer centric. And it's really dependent on the use case or the application that we're trying to push. If we are to develop an application tomorrow that would require specific AI capabilities, GCP might be a better fit than AWS. And that's how things work. So I think we need to, when defining a general strategy, is to think of multi-cloud. I think Nikolai mentioned that earlier, but I think it's really important, even if you are thinking of a single cloud provider today, to ensure that your strategy maps across, because statistics are pretty clear, and I think the direction worldwide is clear. You're going to end up having multi-cloud, including private as well. Now, if you are to embark on that journey, and if you are to maybe have a discussion with somebody who did already, you have multiple ways that you can go and address security. And we're probably very specific to public cloud at this point. The first one, and probably the easiest, is to go and map against CSP provided tools. So your cloud service provider will offer you a bit of capabilities. You would utilize that. It's integrated, it's easy, and it's probably cheap at start. You would end up facing two challenges down the line. The first one is, if we are maybe down the line, a year down the line, a developer walks in and asks us to go and provision something new in GCP or AWS, how do we build up our security capabilities over there? Do we end up using GCP or AWS's native capability and figure out how do we map risks and map controls over there in what would end up being not only a very expensive affair, but one that is really siloed in terms of security. But the second challenge, and this is where hybrid cloud comes in an environment that is really connected today, specifically when we're talking about app modernization and containers, there's a real link between what happens on-prem and in the cloud. And if you are to go and deploy controls in the cloud that do not map to what you have in a private cloud environment, then I think that's where we run a lot of risk. The second and third are probably reserved to organizations that are maybe blessed with having enough people and being able to retain that talent and keep them upskilled. And that's where we see a lot of use of open source tools and do-it-yourself projects. These are very people intensive. And I think these are usually reserved to organizations maybe the size of Netflix or Uber. And we found that we have a lot of organizations within our region that have started to try deploying that, but end up failing because of a lot of reasons. There are obviously exceptions. If you think you are the exception, then you can probably try. But based on feedback that we've seen from a lot of customers, I think this is really hard. But last but not least, an area that maybe is reserved for organizations that want to repeat sins of the past, go and deploy siloed technologies that are not integrated. But the challenge you're going to face in a cloud environment is the magnitude of speed. So if you had a problem with a specific app, that's going to be 10x today. If you had a problem with time in addressing challenges, that's also going to be 10x at least. So we think the approach should be one that is really integrated, that offers capabilities across things that we've been talking about so far. There's a question that came up in the chat around how do we secure your data while transferring to cloud. That area at Palo Alto Networks is within what we call the Prisma Access solution. So that really focuses on how do we secure your journey to cloud, whether it was for mobile users or remote offices, and we can probably provide you with some more details around that. So where do we start? What we usually suggest to customers is a 4 to 5 step approach, again, Palo Alto or not, but one that really starts with visibility, really understanding what do I have within a cloud environment. But that visibility is one that needs to focus on 2 areas. The first one is, how are these cloud environments configured? But the second one is to have actual visibility into the workloads. And this is basically built on the notion that you cannot secure what you can't see. Now, the second step is probably a bit controversial, we would suggest to customers to start with guardrails before looking at standards. So before implementing your compliance standards, look at guardrails. And what we mean with guardrails is being able to implement a capability against anti-pattern. And what that means is, what is a configuration that should never exist in my environment? I would go and build a proactive control against that. And what that is going to help me do is help me bridge the gap between where I am as a security team and the speed that my development organization runs at. Because the challenge that we've seen with customers that deploy standards first, and let's say they're deploying industry standard, you're going to end up playing follow-up continuously. Your developers team is going to be running at the speed of light, and you're going to be responding back to violations of standards while not being able to take actions against them. So the guardrails would guard you against those 60 to 70% of the challenges you're going to have. We're going to automate these. So with Prisma Cloud, we ship out with about 100 plus of these guardrails, which are things that we know all customers would like to go and remediate the same way. I don't want to have a storage that is accessible to public. I don't want to allow SSH or RDP from the internet. So we'd be able to go and detect these and then be able to remediate them automatically and figure out how do we build controls to ensure that we fix that behavior. The next step would be implementing standards, whether that was industry standard or maybe custom. And maybe the end state that a lot of organizations want to end at, and maybe some of you are already there, is to be able to automate everything. Utilize the capability that CI/CD pipelines bring to us in being able to respond back to security violations, compliance violations, doing so at the speed of development, and only leaving 10% or 20%, depending on your organization, of incidents that would ultimately surface that would be sent to your SOC team, or would probably even be integrated with Prisma Cloud with a SOAR platform like XSOAR to be able to go and take an automated remediation by triggering a specific playbook. So with that, maybe just a quick explanation of what Prisma Cloud is. Prisma Cloud provides 4 distinct pillars, and we've built the solution in a way that allows you to consume security the same way that you consume those cloud environments. So you have a single licensing module that allows you to run through the use cases that we have on the screen. The starting point, obviously, is what we spoke about earlier around visibility, compliance, and governance. This is where we would understand what do we have in the cloud, who's accessing what changes are they making to answer the basic questions. But then we'll be able to go and help you automatically deploy standards against industry compliance. But maybe you want to go further and do a bit of custom compliance. That's something that we can also do out of the box. And from a governance perspective, that's where the guardrails come in. These would guardrail against anomalies that we spoke about earlier, but also give you a lot of control over your infrastructure as code templates. Part of what we do as well is benchmarking your cloud environment and trying to understand a baseline over there to be able to go and detect anomalies that could be happening, again, with a lot of capabilities around remediation. You're going to find that there's a general automation theme across everything that we do. The second, probably more, or the most interesting part, I think, for a lot of organizations in our discussions with them is around compute security. This is where we move into a prevention approach, one that looks at applications, one that supports bare metal servers that could be sitting on-prem. You'd be able to support VMs, but you'd also be able to go and protect your containers, containers as service, orchestrators, function as service, and beyond, and be able to go and do that throughout the development lifecycle. Being able as a security team to define a specific rule that a developer then that is writing code in his IDE can get a response back to violations that they're doing then, but also providing automation capabilities across registries, SCM, CI/CD, but also through runtime. And that's where I think a lot of our customers start, but you can obviously pick that as a starting point and then venture out into other areas. The third component is, I think, one that is associated with Palo Alto Networks. We do network security. We're well known for that. and we're not any different in a cloud environment. What we provide over here is a cloud native approach that provides firewalling capabilities that is very automated. And when I say cloud native firewalling, what I mean by that is if I start a container on-prem today and then it shifts or moves to AWS tomorrow, how do I ensure that my firewall rule is following that? So we don't track IPs or subnets, but we're rather image based. But we also provide a lot of WAF capabilities and API protection in these environments that are highly API dependent. And last but not least, if you want to push the boundaries and if you want to really provide segmentation capabilities in a cloud environment, that's where we provide a very unique way of achieving microsegmentation that thinks of microsegmentation as a security problem rather than relying on networking parameters. So we decouple security from the network and we build an application or cryptographic application identity that is then used as the form of authorizing communication. The last point is one that subscribes to the school of thought of identity being the new perimeter in cloud. How do I achieve a least privilege model in a highly automated, highly dynamic cloud environment? And that's an area that we can also provide a lot of capabilities with. That was my time. I hope that I did end up sticking to time. If you have any more questions, I'm going to be in the networking lounge. You can connect to us directly over the platform. I'm going to be here over the next couple of hours. My email address is on the deck, so if you have any specific questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them. Off to the next session, and we'll see you in the panel discussion later today. Thanks for your time.